As outsiders, it seems like they're just having so much fun, really. I just wonder, just as entertainment professionals, how real it is, because at the end of the day, it's not like they don't know that they're being recorded. And so to what extent is it all genuine? It feels genuine.
The thing is, you're looking for the little bits in it that show that, like, caught off guard.
Right.
Or you can almost see something that when it's kind of almost staged in the way they kind of say something, and it's almost as telling, like it's almost affected the way that they say something because they're almost aware of the thing. And so it's more the little bits you're looking for. That's the way I kind of was looking at it, because at the end of the day, they do know there is, and they probably are so trained at that point after Beatlemania that, like, you know, what they do or say, it's a much more intimate thing. So you can see their kind of reaction, and as well, you can see the different personalities, and they are very much different personalities. You know, I know it's like the quiet one and all that. You know, it was always it was almost trying to crowbar into their image to people trying to make money off it, but they are very much four different personalities. And I think that's essentially as well why you see the backdrop of them breaking up, because they're going in four different directions. And it's very interesting to see it. Like, even you look at George Harrison songs he's writing, and it's obviously they don't have, well, I don't know, do they ever have much interest in doing his songs, but they're moving, like, he's essentially becoming like a proper songwriter, like a giant of songwriting. I think though as well though, it's that he's actually consistently been like, you know, because they probably like, oh, like it's almost condescending, like, oh, you've got a good song, finally we put it number one. While it's now he's like, oh, he's like bashing out songs as good as the other two, and you're like, how do you fit them into 14 track record?
Yeah, well, so, and the White Album really kind of highlights that, because, you know, you can make a very strong argument that he had the best songs on the album, on the White Album, and you can make a very strong argument that John had the best songs on the album. And you probably make a very strong. He is a contemporary at that point. I think he hindsight has kind of, I think, made it semi-clear that he was just at that time as good as Lennon and McCartney, whether they knew it at the time or not. But we, seeing history the way it is, I think we can see that, like, he is just as good as they are. And so when we see that they're still not giving him a chance, it's quite dramatic, I guess, because, like, you know, we can see a guy that wants to bloom, but he's just not able to bloom in front of these guys.
Yeah. Well, when you think about the next album, like Here Comes the Sun and Something are the best songs on this. Like they're like, you know, they're legendary Beatles songs. I think, like, it comes to dynamics, that the dynamics are like they're going in four different directions, and the dynamics that held them together to get to that point are coming apart at the seams because they're so restrictive. Well, even with that, the interview that John and McCartney do, where they don't know they're being recorded, and they're like talking about what George has to give up.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael Lindsay Hogg.
I found that was, like, strange that they thought it was ethically okay to plant a mic, knowing that to record a conversation they know that didn't want to be recorded. But then when George Harrison leaves the band, he's like, cut the camera, and you're like,
and they cut it.
Why did they do that? Like, why, like, surely he'd be more entitled to go, no, well, this is part of film.
Do you realize that this is the exact moment where we're not cutting, because this is like our bread and butter. Like, we've waited this entire time for this moment. There's a big missing scene that occurs where it comes to him coming back in. He comes back in with good spirits. It seems as though nothing really bad has happened. As a Beatles fan, I see, like, George Harrison, and I'm thinking, like, well, do you actually have the grounds to being as upset as you are right now? Like, are you being kind of dramatic, or is it grounded? Like,
to leave.
There's a lot of before stuff that must have happened for George Harrison just to leave, because what we see is not maybe the makings of someone that is going to leave the biggest band in the world.
Joe, the background noise, like, Joe, that's, I think, the biggest thing about this one is how he's able. You can hear everything that's going on. While in the original one, it's kind of confusing. You don't fully.
Well, what they would do, Patrick, what they would do is if they had an important thing to say, they'd be playing guitar.
Yeah.
To balance out them talking, so they wouldn't be able to hear these important conversations. Through the benefit of technology, Peter Jackson's like, well, we were a little naughty and we just took that down and we loaded up their voices and got some great material from it.
And I think that's as well, like they're kind of caught off guard, and it brings it back to the point that it's quite intimate, and you do catch them off guard because you
hear stuff that you were not meant to hear necessarily.
Yeah, and you get a sense of what they're like as genuine people, or like what they are like behind the masks. But
and not so dissimilar than just like a regular Joe, really. And it's just like regular people, and they are fantastic. But like, it's nothing. It's nothing superhero that they're ever doing. I mean, in my opinion, I feel like they're just really it is very exciting though when you see the movie and they're like, oh, like the one night, like, oh, I came up with this song last night, and it's like, oh, I came up with this song last night, and they turn out to be like on the album. It just seems like they're very clutch when it needs to, like, when those Beatles need to come up with stuff, they're able to come up with stuff.
It's the genius of it. It's just you're expecting something spectacular, and it's very gritty how they come up with something that becomes like a masterpiece. It feels like there's a flippancy about the whole project. And Joe, essentially, like, Joe, they're talking about like the gigs. And now your man, Lindsay Hogg, doesn't
that was so funny.
He doesn't help it when he's like pushing for it to be in Tunisia, when you're like, look, just let's pick a realistic thing. Like, why don't, like, they were like, oh, it's going to be on in 2 weeks. Like, let's talk about with it. Oh, let's get a boat and like bring people from the UK over. And then
there was no master plan. There was no master plan the entire time. It was all just like, oh, let's just do this. And then like in history, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like this magnificent thing. But it was all just like random. It was all just like day of.
It was just spoke to the amateurness of, like, if they had someone to tell them you can't do that, like someone like probably Epstein, like people are kind of alluding to it, but who's going to take on the Beatles? And they're talking about, oh, we'll get a boat. And then like, oh, George is like, well, like,
they're on a boat all of a sudden, and like it's like, what?
And we won't get away from him. Imagine being 3 days on the boat with him. And then it's like, they're like, no, we won't do it. And then they're like thinking of all this stuff, and it gets whittled down till eventually, Joe, like, it's seen as this.
A lesser band would have succumbed to the pressure of all of this, and yet you have like one of the biggest producers do these like fantastic things, and then you have the biggest band in the world being like, I don't want to do that, and then they keep pivoting to like these various. Oh, it's so funny.
I think it comes out, but I don't think it was a lesser band. I think that it was so mental, the idea that they would hire this boat, like the money in as well, like it's just crazy. So like no other like, because no other, like, they were just like, oh, we'll do this, and then it gets whittled down. Like, when you think about it, seen as a historic thing that they like, and it, like, you know, they played up on the roof, which is just such a slap of the cap job. It's just like,
and it goes back to that original kind of rebellious rock and roll nature. That's something that the original Beatles could have done. It's not outside the realm of just original rebelliousness.
I think it comes down to just pure laziness and
you don't like the rooftop. You don't like the rooftop.
No, I think it's great, but I think Joe's seen as this almost premeditated thing, and it's like Joe, they go like, just, they're all setting it up, and they're talking about it to decide if they're even going to do it. It's just they're so disjointed.
They're fat cats at this point, and they know it, and maybe rightfully so. Like, they see perhaps the death of Brian Epstein as like their first chance to breathe. They probably haven't had a chance to breathe, and so the extravagance of maybe what they want stems from 7 years of actually not being able to say what you want to do. You just have to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes across they don't know what they want to do, and they don't have.
Yeah.
It's like essentially like they are only qualified, and they're the best at writing songs, playing music, and then they're trying to do it like, so when they have John Lennon talking about that plastic and they cast the plastic stage,
yeah.
and you're like, who are you?
You can see through it.
Yeah, who's he to like? He's not qualified to be like, and they don't have anyone to tell them.
Yeah.
No, let us like give us generally what you want to do, and we'll see what's possible. They just have this. They're just go, oh, we'll do this, and people are like, yeah, and then you got Lindsay Hogg that's like, oh, that good, like with candles and all, and obviously he's a director, so
the patients he's taking over the asylum at that point.
He's not qualified to organize that either. He's like, if you get there, he's qualified to like those shots and like the stage, like, but getting them over there, and then you're like, they're talking about, oh, they're like, will they even go up on the stage? And then they were surprised that the police went to shut them down, and you're like, yeah, obviously, like they know people aren't good.
Those
and then
poor police officers too, and like they're like, they see the video cameras on them and stuff. Like, I am literally the most hated person in England right now, but it's like, I'm gonna lose my job if I don't do what I got to do right now.
Oh, they were so, it took, now I guess it could be because of editing, you don't know when they actually came into the thing, but they went through so much, like they didn't exactly go in and like just shut the whole thing down. They were no.
They were in that lobby the entire time. I swear, it's like, you can't go past that actually, and it's a health risk, because if there was one more person to be on that roof, it would fall down. And so it's this situation where it's like, well, we've had 30 complaints in 15 minutes, miss, and so we need to go up there. And it's like this hilarious kind of almost like British like comedy where it's just the absurdity of it all, you know.
Well, I think as well, like, you know, that they're up on the top of the roof and then they play like Get It Back like at least 3 times, and they play Don't Let Me Down, and you're like, it just speaks to the fact that they weren't organized. Like, they didn't get the stuff that, like, they didn't meet the deadline. They didn't get the stuff down.
When I forgot to mention this actually prior, like during the expectation portion of the podcast, but I'm a big fan of the podcast Something About the Beatles, and going into the opening of the Get Back films, they had a lot of things to say, you see, and they were saying that in no way can we expect them to do Get Back 2 or 3 times. There is no way that they are going to include the Pakistani stuff when it comes to recording Get Back. There is no way that they're going to include this, and that, and they include all of it. They include absolutely all of it, and that's just it. It really does feel at the end of it, when you finish Get Back, a finished product. It feels like there is just closure. It's so self-sufficient and it's so brilliant. There really isn't much I can say except that I've seen a lot of documentaries, and the best documentaries are the ones that are just in the right place at the right time. And fucking Get Back is in the right place at the right time.
Hey, that's pretty good.